Okay, well, hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Lisa Versace and I'm the Programs and Engagement Manager here at the California Preservation Foundation. I'm also joined by John Haber, CPF's Field Services Director, and our Education Committee Lead for this program, Molly Eicher Johnson. CPF is a 501c3 nonprofit organization providing statewide leadership, advocacy, and education to ensure the protection of California's diverse cultural heritage and historic places. Our work, including the ability to host free programs such as this one, is made possible by the generous support of our members, donors, and sponsors. Today's program will be presented by David Judson, fifth-generation president of Judson Glass, the oldest family-run stained glass studio in the United States. David is also the co-author of the recent publication Judson, Innovation in Stained Glass. That is this gorgeous photo-heavy book, which captures the 125-year history of the company. It's a really fascinating read, and we highly recommend you pick up a copy for yourself. David has generously provided us with a code to offer you a 10% discount to buy it from his website. And it's really just beyond stunning. I really highly recommend you pick up a copy for yourself, for someone you know who loves art and architecture. It's just really, I can't say enough about it. It's been sitting on my desk and I can't stop looking at it. Please take a minute to familiarize yourself with Zoom's chat and Q&A functions. Through the presentation, we encourage you to share your thoughts through chat, but please, if possible, use the Q&A function for any questions you have for David. Molly and I will be monitoring the questions and we'll be asking them to David at the end of the program, where we've set aside some time for that. David, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to hand it over to Molly, CPF's Education Committee member for this program. She's also a senior architectural historian at ICF, and she's going to serve as today's moderator. And she'll introduce you a little bit further, David, and then you guys can get this program underway.
Great.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Molly Eicher Johnson, and I'm pleased to moderate today's session. As Lisa mentioned, David is the current president and owner of Judson Studios. He has overseen hundreds of national and international projects since 1996, and in 2015 expanded the studio's operations to incorporate, fused glass capabilities. He also acquired a glass kiln forming company in 2020. Not least among his impressive accomplishments are his bachelor's degree in Spanish literature and master's degree in international relations. During today's talk, he'll go over some of Judson's historical installations, as well as more recent and current restoration projects. And so without further ado, I'll pass the mic to David to get things started.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you, everybody, for joining me here today. And I appreciate CPF allowing me to speak, and look forward to kind of sharing with you some work from Judson, and kind of introduce you to the world of glass, depending on how familiar you are with it. I have quite a few slides, so I'll be moving pretty quickly. Let me see if I can get these up and running. Let's see. Are you guys seeing one slide or two?
We are not yet seeing any slides.
Okay, let me share my screen here real quick. Okay, how about
And
now?
we're seeing the one slide.
One slide, okay, great. Yeah, as mentioned, we're an old firm. We just celebrated our 125th anniversary of operation here in Los Angeles, California. And so it's been kind of a unique situation. Being fifth generation of a company brings a lot of advantages and disadvantages, I like to say, because a foundation's been laid for you, but also there's a strong sense of kind of finding your own identity and how you play into the role of the company, and how do you make sure it continues to do what has come before you, and be able to build on it and share it. So today I'll be talking a little bit about the history. I'll give you a brief history of the studio, and its foundings in 1893. I'll talk a little bit about a few projects that we've been working on that were preservation related that I think are interesting, kind of larger projects we've done. Ironically, none of them in California, but they're interesting projects to look at. And then I have a contemporary project that we're working on that I'd love to share, just to kind of show you what the glass that we're doing today is. Not all of it, but some of it. And I think what's unique to our studio, what we're doing today, and also kind of share with you what the future of preservation of glass might look like based on what we're doing today. So kind of a unique perspective on contemporary work and the processes that we're using today that are very different from in the past. So briefly, Judson Studios starts with this man. He's my great-great-grandfather, William Lee Judson. He came to California in 1893 from Chicago. He was born in England, moved to Canada, fought in the Civil War, taught art in England. He was a university professor of painting. He was a painter. He was in Chicago from 1890 to 93, preparing for the World's Fair, and then came to California to basically find a warm climate to die, which is what quite a few people did into coming to Pasadena. And he didn't die until 1928, so he had some other plans. He was one of the early plein air painters in Southern California. This is a shot of this is the Arroyo Seco. If you're familiar with Pasadena, this, from what we know, is the Hawley Street Bridge. Over the hill on the right would be the Rose Bowl. But this is now, unfortunately, does not look like this. A little bit, but not exactly. There's a big barranca in it now, and closer south is the 110 freeway. But the little house on the left is pretty amazing to think about what that period must have been like. He couldn't afford to live in Pasadena, but he did get this house that you see on the left-hand side at the end of the bridge there. And what's interesting is these two bridges. You see one bridge go right here and another bridge here. And then he built his house right here. So this is looking north at the San Gabriel Mountains. On the right is Pasadena. On the left is Highland Park, where we are now. So this was kind of the area where a lot of artists came because of the light and the ability to paint in nature. And then right outside here, the two bridges, the red car right here. And I don't know if the train broke down or these guys stopped to pose for a photo, but I love this. He's, they're kind of standing out here, the red car here. And then back, you can see this train back here. That's the regular train, the Santa Fe that ran across the Arroyo Seco. Now, this is the 110 freeway. So there's a driving bridge, but now this is the no longer a Arroyo Seco, a dry bed, but it's the 110 freeway. And Judson built this building in 1900 for the University of Southern California. It was a School of Fine Arts. Our building is still at this location, although this building burned down in 1910 and was rebuilt with a little differently. But I think a very unique building. This must have been an amazing building in 1900 in Los Angeles, almost kind of, Viennese secessionists. He must have gotten influence from the World's Fair, is my guess. And this building, he was the first dean. They supported him. He was one of the few that had experience teaching the college level at the university at that time. And also, he was a Methodist, which, if you know USC was their fighting Methodist at that time. So he kind of fit the bill. The university stayed in this location until 1920, where it centralized to downtown. This is from the yearbook, the El Rodeo in 1901. What the art class must have been like, trouncing around the Arroyo Seco. That's William Lee's on the right-hand side there, holding up the easel. And then Judson also founded the Arroyo Guild of Fellow Crafters. This was their one publication, the Arroyo Craftsman, kind of their answer to Stickley's The Craftsman publication. But they were better craftsmen than publishers. They didn't get past volume 1, number 1. So this is the one and only. I reprinted it, maybe 20 or 30 years ago. And it's an interesting insight. But the We Can logo is really kind of interesting. I always say that's the California version of William Morris's, which in Latin translates to "if we can." So I say the California version is "we can." And so anyway, it was a very much kind of an idyllic time period where they got these craftsmen together, kind of sell their wares, and located in this building. And this is the building that was built after the fire. So the building that you saw would have been the left-hand side. The right-hand side was added on by Train and Williams, the architects Train and Williams, who were the architects of the Royal Guild and colleagues of Judson at the time. And this is a little bit later. You can see how much the school had grown, sitting out in front, primarily women, as you notice. This is a kind of an acceptable university level subject matter that women studied. And so the school continued to grow. And then lastly, Judson founded the Judson Studios with his son. So these are his three sons. My great-grandfather there in the middle with the fantastic mustache, and his two brothers. This is a photo of them in front of the old building before the fire. But he sent for them after he came out. Judson came out in 1893. He sent for his sons in 1895. And they worked for a local stained glass studio until 1897, when they founded their own firm called the Colonial Art Glass Company. And their first project was in this building. And this building, amazingly, if you know Pasadena, this building was on Orange Grove in Pasadena. And this is the first Phineas mansion. And Miss Phineas was the the building in her name is the Pasadena Historical Museum, if you know that, which is just above the Norton Simon. This would have been just south of the Norton Simon on Orange Grove. It burned down, unfortunately, but it is amazing to think that this building, that long ago. And Judson made the window in the ceiling here in the canopy. You can see peacock and all. I don't think the peacock is real, but it's great for the photo. And this photograph here. So when I was working on the book, the museum came to me and said, "Hey, do you know this?" And I'd never seen this installation before. This is 1897. So this is the earliest installation that we know of Judson, and super lucky that they had this on record and correspondence between Mrs. Phineas, the architect, and Judson. So we were very excited to find this, and just really interesting to see as such a strong Islamic motif in the first earliest window. Also very involved with the arts and crafts movement, obviously. This is a window that was done for Clyde Brown. You see his initials on the lower right. So if you know Highland Park, the area, it's the Abbey of San Encino, owned by the Jackson family. And Clyde Brown was an early printer in the area. And so this legend has it that this window was done in exchange for some promotional marketing material for Judson. And this window still exists down at the Abbey. The Abbey's in pretty bad shape, but it's still there. Judson also did a lot of kind of American art class, which is, if you think of Tiffany at that time, this was some early landscape pieces that they did for Inglewood Mausoleum. And I'll show you some contemporary. We've done some contemporary windows in the new technique that I'm going to show you. So if you remember these landscapes, I'll show you the landscapes that we did in this same mausoleum, in the Inglewood Mausoleum in Inglewood. And quite a few Tiffany folks came to work for Judson a little bit later. The Natural History Museum in LA, which we restored in 2009. The LA Central Library, this is a 5-foot globe that was built. It was a good hue building, an amazing space with the all of the murals on the wall and everything. And the sculpture was actually done by Lee Laurie. Lee Laurie was, if you know the Atlas Shrugged in Rockefeller Center, this is the same artist, Lee Laurie, that was there. And that piece is still in the library. Also, around that time, All Saints Church in Pasadena, fantastic church. If you're in Pasadena and you haven't been to this church, it's worth a visit. The window that you see there is this window, which was done by an artist, Frederick Wilson, who was working for Judson at the time. So there are two major Tiffany windows in the transepts that are done by Frederick Wilson as well, but when he was working with Tiffany. And then he came out when he was overseeing a project in Los Angeles, and he ended up staying, working for Judson for a number of years, along with LA Art Glass Company, which was another early stained glass studio in Los Angeles. And we restored this window in 2013. But if you only have one church, or you want to see some stained glass, this is the place to go, because there's Tiffany windows, Judson windows, Maitland Armstrong windows. It's a really fantastic space. Judson also did the work for the Hollyhock House for Frank Lloyd Wright, which we also restored in 2000. If you haven't been there since they've done the restoration on this area, it's really spectacular. They're continuing the restoration, but we did some of the glass early on, and it was in fairly good shape, actually. So there was not a ton of restoration on these, but Judson also did the Ennis House windows. And I found in my research in my book that by the time these windows were made, Frank Lloyd Wright and his son had both been hired and fired by the Ennises for the Ennis House. And so the windows, we have not seen the original designs, although this window design showed up in an early catalog that was at Judson Studios, out of a firm operating in Chicago. So we think that perhaps the Ennises had some influences that they drew, but these are not designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, as far as we know. But we don't know who designed them, but they're still intact, and we've done some restoration work over them over the years. So a few case studies. So because of our work with the restoration work that we've done in Frank Lloyd Wright, we were able to bid on this project, the Unity Temple, in 2018. They did a full restoration of the entire building. If you haven't been there since, it's spectacular. They did an amazing job. We work with Bergman Construction. Here you can see our crew getting ready to remove some of the windows. You can see some of the paint damage over on the left, the water damage. It was in pretty bad shape, the structure, and it needed a lot of work. The windows themselves were in really bad shape. They'd been restored many times over the years. There was a lot of bad repairs, so the decision was made to completely take them apart and rebuild them. And you can see the crates arriving at our studio from Chicago. Here you can see the kind of the removal of the skylights. This is not in the actual temple. This is next to in the school next door. A lot of the glass. So like I said, the decision was made. They were in such bad condition. A lot of the caming at that time, rather than using lead came, Frank Lloyd Wright liked to use zinc, which is a much stiffer metal. It had been failing, leaking. It's very difficult to repair. So the repairs that have been done over the years were bad. A lot of the glass that was in there was poorly matched. So we were asked to match existing glass. So we went out to 4 of our vendors. I think we ended up using 2 different vendors to find matching glass. And they actually custom replicated the glass for us to reinsert into areas where bad replacements had been done. Here you can see the zinc caming, the precision that it took to rebuild these Frank Lloyd Wright's lines, obviously very important. The thicknesses of the came, and the horrible thing about this was that once it was agreed on that the zinc was going to be replaced in these windows, we got a letter from the zinc manufacturer that they were going out of business. And so we scoured the country, even internationally, trying to find anybody who had zinc in stock. We were having zero luck. But then we found that the equipment that this company was making the zinc was purchased by a company in Canada. And they were going to get these machines up and running, but we didn't know when, and they weren't in a big rush. So it was horrible. We had to wait until they could get the machines up and operating. But eventually they did, and they were able to replicate all the sizes that we needed for this job. But a lot of stress that was not needed. These projects are stressful enough. The other thing is the soldering, which is very difficult to solder zinc because solder can sit on the surface. You can kind of see some of the solder joints there on the connections. we had to use these special tips that we designed that were very fine to minimize the amount of solder on the surface of the zinc came. This was a very so it was very labor intensive to minimize that as much as possible. And then once they're glazed or soldered, then we use a waterproofing technique, which is we call cement, because they used to use Portland cement back in the day. We use a lamp black dye, and that's basically a custom-made putty that we have that we work with a brush in between the flanges of the cames and the glass. That seals it, it stiffens the panels, and it also patinas the came down. So the problem with that is that when there's clear glass and you're adding this on, it has to be extremely clean, because anything you leave on the surface can show. And so the cleaning of these was really brutal and very meticulous work. We also fixed and repaired all of their light fixtures, and so they remade all of these for the electrical purposes, updated all of these and cleaned them up, rewired them, and we redid all the boxes that you can see on the left there with a special hook system that had to fit in, and all of this was replaced. So these are just some kind of after shots that are pretty spectacular. The space is really amazing. They did a fantastic job on all the colors and paints, and the glass really is something. A lot of the trick with Frank Lloyd Wright is that everything has to line up perfectly. And so taking this apart, putting back together is not so easily done because of the registration of everything that has to fit in. And this is in the building next door. And that's just a glamour shot. I love this shot. They took this shot afterward, and the glass, I think, looks so great tucked in there. And it's a beautiful building. Very, very honored and excited to be a part of that. The next job, a very different job, and this is actually a job we're still working on, the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. Again, if you haven't been there, it's worth a visit. Not now, but when they're redoing it, they've completely taken this building apart and are putting it back together. It's kind of exciting to work on this project. My grandfather did these windows in 1960 with Walter Niche. Very, very involved with the project. This is what it looks like at night. And on the inside. And so you see that photo in the upper left-hand side, it's right up on the hill, and the winds get very intense. So in terms of construction, they basically had to completely encase the chapel. And so you can see with the cranes that the structure going in on the left-hand side, they completely boxed the entire structure in because it was totally coming apart. And so it's been a very, because we've been working on this 3 years. They don't know when they're going to install. It could be another year or 2 years. But we were kind of some of the first in once the scaffolding went in. And we had to label everything. You see the label on the right. We did a full assessment of all the panels, all the breaks, tracked everything down. Luckily, the numbering system that my grandfather used in 1960, we found in the files, and we were able to reuse that numbering system. So because of the complication, I mean, there's over 2,400 panels that had to be pulled out, what we call cassettes, and over almost 30,000 pieces of glass that you see here. So here you see 9 pieces. Also, interestingly, this is what we call dalle de verre, which is a very thick glass rather than thin leaded glass. Dalle de verre was very popular in mid-century, and it in this is often set with either concrete or epoxy. In this case, it was set just in aluminum cassettes, and so it was a little bit of a different installation. And so the idea was that we had to go and remove all of these. At one point, they found asbestos on the project, so we were pulled off. They brought in an abatement company to finish up the removal, and that was all done in containment. The asbestos folks removed the panels, handed them out of containment once they were bagged to us. And then we took everything down, brought them back to the studio. We had to kind of document them before we started cleaning. So everything was fully photographed. You can see all of the sealants that were used, all the black there, even those top three. Let's see how those are completely blacked out. So this building leaked from day one. And I saw in the correspondence in the early files is that they thought that it was the windows. But come to find out as they were doing some digging is that an interior gutter system had been engineered out of the construction. And so the leakage obviously came through the windows because it came through everywhere. And the building still leaked when they finally started taking this apart. But so over the years, they just added more and more sealants. And so these windows were just covered in sealants. And here we are, you can see all that sealant that's been removed, not just from that one panel, but we had to work in containment to remove all the sealants, clean them up. We basically left the windows in the cassettes unless they were cracked or damaged, and then those were taken out. We thought we were going to have to replace them, but we were able to glue all of the broken dalle de verre. So we've been able to reuse all the original glass because they were custom made originally. And so we were able to glue those together and reset them. And then now we are done with this project. They're all crated. They're sitting in crates in Colorado Springs. And so we're probably looking at install next year or in 26. The last kind of a project is this one. We're currently working on this project. This is the Missouri State Capitol building. This is a 25-foot dome. It's a beautiful dome, super complicated and complex. It's been a very challenging installation. Here, I'll show you kind of the site itself. This is kind of someone from my team put this together. Beautiful building. They're doing several projects of restoration over. You can see our scaffold to our panel sitting up there, the dance floor. So this is prior to removal. And you can see the access of what it took to get up there. And luckily they had a crane for us to lower the panels down. But those panels that look like trapezoids, this one right there with the red border and the two figures in it, those were over 12 feet long. So these were massive panels. Biggest panels that we've actually ever worked on. And so getting those down was not fun to do. This is the first stained glass. They have quite a bit of stained glass in the building. This is the first one that they've decided to tackle because it was overhead and in bad shape. So one of the things that we had to address was the structural system of it. And so as we kind of went in and started looking at this, we noticed someone had come in over there, I think in the 80s or 90s, and it'd add this secondary support system. So you see the primary support system are these really thick steel pieces, and then the secondary system would have all of these clips in. And unfortunately, these clips came in after the fact, and they basically just drilled through the glass, through the panels to tie these down onto the bars. And so that created an amazing amount of damage to the window. Here you can see how many they actually added and how much went in. So there was quite a bit of damage to stop this failure of the panels. And unfortunately, they kind of sacrificed the material itself to create this structural system. So we really work with them to look at that. So the state actually commissioned a 3D scan of the entire structure, which, this is interesting, but what is it really doing? And actually it ended up being a very helpful. So you can see kind of here, they applied it to a heat map. So you can see where this deflection or bowing is happening in the panels, where these panels are coming out of curve and out of plane in essence. And that red spot, if you can see that one red spot, let's see if I can show this right here. And you can see it here, right here. We think at some point somebody must have stepped on it, climbing up in the structure. And so there was no glass loss there, but it was definitely an issue. But this ended up being very helpful. What we ended up talking to them about was, if we could move that support structure below the window rather than above it. And they were totally against it initially because they didn't want to see it. And our argument with them was, look, you're seeing more shadow from the structure above than you would see looking at it directly from below. And so it took us quite a bit of meetings and discussions with the architects and the engineers. But we've newly designed a system, a structural system that will go underneath the windows, the panels. So the panels will go on top of this infrastructure system, and then they'll be tied down with copper clips, basically. I want to tell you a little bit about the process. So I'm mostly going to be talking about the projects, but I wanted to also kind of describe the process a little bit. All the panels are brought down. Like I mentioned, you can see the straight line shadows that are there. That's the dirt that's left over around the bars. So the bars have been removed. We take the panels out, we document them. It's taken apart and cleaned, which I'll walk you through that process, but you can see the difference that a major restoration can do to this. And what's amazing is that it's all of this detail, which you can see. It's really hard to see down below, but we started seeing these birds, which we didn't see before. You see the snake in the upper right-hand corner. And then, as I mentioned, a lot of where the interventions were, we used copper foil to fix cracks in existing glass. So because the glass was proving extremely difficult to match, we tried to reuse as much of it as possible, which we try to do anyway. And so using copper foil, we can get a much finer line rather than the lead that you see there. And so that, here's another bird. It's a little bit cleaner, didn't have as much breakage. But all of these details were, for us, really amazing because we hadn't really seen it. So anyway, what we do is we bring those panels in. They're all shipped in crates to our studio. We take the bars off, the structure off. We make rubbings. So you see this here is a rubbing of all of the lead lines. These are all annotated. And then we make copies of those. So we send them to a special scanner where we can get them scanned. And then you see as they're taken apart, they're laid onto a second one. Here it is being taken apart. So again, this is meticulous, just handwork. Everything has to be done slowly. They're all working in fairly controlled environment. There you see the rubbing. So all the pieces that have been taken out of the leads are moved to the secondary one. And again, it has to be very meticulous because everything's got to go back exactly where it came from. Here you see a little bit of a closer. We use a red Sharpie. You see these dots annotating cracks, which are also noted on the drawings. And then the drawings themselves, you see the blue line here, the purple line here, and the orange here. These represent different lead sizes. So we have a key, and each lead, there was multiple sizes of lead profiles that were used. So we had to annotate all of those in the rubbings before we started reglazing them. And here you can see them being reglazed. Again, extremely difficult. A lot of miters on the leads. So you can see like lead, for example, right here, how long this miter is on this piece of lead to get this line. And just this tiny piece of glass right here. So the craftsmanship and the kind of knowledge of rebuilding this is really important to making sure that we're respecting the design. And lead is considered, a material that can be replaced. It's normal. It happens. Most cathedrals in Europe, for example, have their own stained glass studios where that maintenance is going on a regular basis. This is that large panel that I mentioned to you. You can see how massive it is. We've broken this up into 4 panels, and then we can have basically one lead that will take the lead next to it, and we can slide these together. So minor joints were created to then tie them down once they're put in place. But it wasn't safe for us, and it wasn't safe to reinstall these back as one panel. So we've decided a way to redo it. The other interesting thing is, you can see this tray here. labeled. All of our panels get moved around on trays so we can get them through doors, through the shop and that kind of thing. You can see all the LEDs that he's got here. You can see these nails that these are actually horseshoe nails that keep the glass in place as we're rebuilding the window back to its natural state. The other interesting thing we did is that we did what we call sweating the LEDs, or completely covering the lead with solder. So where we would normally, like you can see here on the edges, where there's just a solder joint capturing the lead with the joint, all of this lead is covered in solder. And so what that does for us is that because there's so much tin in the solder, it's a very stiff, it's a much stiffer. So we're actually creating a skin on the surface of the lead on both sides that helps stiffen the panels. So that deflection that you saw in the 3D scans, we're trying to do as much as we can to alleviate that in the future. And this gives us a lot of strength and stiffness to the panels to completely cover the lead cames in solder, and hopefully do away with a lot of that kind of sagging that we saw in the scan. So here it is. You'll see this is not restored. This is before it's taken out. But you can see like all those details that I think will be able to be much more visible once it's cleaned up and we get this back in. It's about 70 feet up in the air, and we'll be reinstalling it before their legislative session goes back at the beginning of the year. It's an interesting year. They have elections. There's bronze doors right underneath this where the new elected governor will come through underneath this thing. So the pressure's on to get that finished. Okay, so that's kind of the restoration side. I did want to share some kind of unique things that we're working on at Judson that most of my colleagues do about 90%. Stained glass companies do about 95% restoration. We're about 50%. So we're still doing quite a bit of new work. And a lot of kind of what we're doing now is influenced by this project that we did in that we won this. It was an international bid that we won in 2017, and it was a massive window that this church is on here. You can see it installed, and this was a job that we had to compete with. We were a finalist with a German firm that was very contemporary. And so because of the contemporary aspect of the architecture, they wanted something that was contemporary, but also there was a traditional aspect. So the selection committee obviously was split between traditional folks and contemporary folks. And so we, known as a traditional studio, really designed something that we wanted to feel contemporary. And we ended up designing something that we didn't really know how to build. So we reached out to an artist named Narcissus Quagliata, who he's in his 80s now, but one of the few stained glass artists that really work with fusing. And so fusing is basically taking different colored glasses that can be combined together, fused in a kiln, and that will remain stable over time. So fusing was not available before the 1980s. It was bullseye glass that really kind of figured out the compatibility of all of their colors. Whereas if you look at traditional stained glass and you take different colors and put them in a kiln, over time, inevitably they will crack and they will stress each other out. And so the interesting thing about bullseye is they've overcome that, which is basically about the expansion of the material of glass. Glass itself is made up of sand, silica, ash, different things, and then the mineral oxides are what give the color to the glass. And so by bringing Narcissus in, who kind of knew how to fuse, we were able to change our own techniques. This is still leaded. You can see the obvious lead lines, but the fusing itself allowed us to make our windows much more painterly. And so not only does this colored glass come in sheet, but also comes in what we call frit. And Bullseye makes 4 different sizes of frit, from a powder to like a small gravel. So it's like powder, sand, slightly small gravel to a little bit of a larger gravel, and each of these sizes of frits create different effects. And so you can see the beautiful kind of, this is the universe that Narcissus did that represents the God the Father, and so we can create these wonderful transitions of color. And I like to show this face just so you can see again that if you see the eyes, this is a 5 foot tall Jesus head. So that head that you're looking at is 5 feet tall. I think this is an amazing piece. I think the most interesting piece that I've seen our studio made or anybody made in glass. And partly that is because of the way it was made. So this is a self-portrait of Narcissus that he did in the 80s. And if you look at that eye, right, look at all the pieces that are leaded together and to get the effects. And so move forward 30 years, 40 years, you can see kind of by fusing, we're able to kind of create these effects, these textures, this is what we call pre-made material. Then we can cut it up, basically assemble it almost like a mosaic, put it in a kiln, and it'll fuse together. And I'll show you a little bit of the process there. But I personally think this is a really amazing piece. And I show that partly because we have conservators asking us, how would we ever conserve that piece? So that's the challenge I put forward to you thinking. So here you see these is a combination of pre-made materials. If you remember, this is working with California plein air painters to make these almost impressionistic windows that were going into that Inglewood Mausoleum where I showed you those kind of Tiffany-esque windows. And so this is what we can do. So you can see there's no lead in these at all. And the other great thing is that we can use a water jet cutter to get very precise. So this is an African artist that we work with. We're doing a lot of collaborations now where this African artist he does these masks. And so he wanted a very precise cuts of glass. And so by using a water jet, we can make these really amazing precise cuts and assemble these panels together. So the last thing I just want to kind of wrap up with another collaboration. So when we finished the project in Kansas City, it was kind of like, well, what do we do now? So one of my big pushes is to work collaboratively with fine artists, primarily painters, to see their projects come together. And James was one of the first we work with. This is the first project he did. A lot of leaded glass, a lot of traditional glass mixed in with some fusing. You can see he's a very kind of comic-based Taiwanese American influence. And we worked with him to kind of develop his work in stained glass. So he moved to a completely fused process and a three-dimensional subject and combined with our traditional painting techniques. So the dark line, for example, you see on the face, that's hand painted by our artists in our studio with a vitreous paint that gets fired into the surface of the glass. And so we're combining these traditional and contemporary techniques. Here you can see the lion and then installed in the gallery. This was shipped to Asia. It's actually in China right now. And one of the things is that when we were figuring out the lighting, when we went inside of this thing of how amazing it would be to be immersed in glass, right? Like how could we create a structure that you could actually go into and look from the inside out? And so James came up with this idea of the pagoda. And the pagoda is this structure that will be, it's like a geodesic dome, but it has 5-sided figures. And we brought together a team to build this structure because it really became an engineering feat. Because how do you get glass to support itself? And James wanted to do it without a steel frame. And I'll show you kind of what we did with that steel frame to kind of evolve from there. But this is a project we're currently working on. These are all kind of some fancy shots that they did in our office. But this is how it started. And we started this about 4 years ago. So we've been working on this 4 years, and the technology of where we started and where we are now is completely different. And here you can see the scale. So it'll be about 17.5 feet wide and about 14 feet high. And you'll be able to go inside of it. And there's a complete seismic structure that's been built around that, but I'm not going to get into that. So we had taken James's artwork. We've broken it down into over 7,000 pieces of glass that we'll cut on the water jet, actually. And so we initially started, there's like maybe 20 of these panels. So you can see the door on the right, standard door on the right-hand side there to give you a sense of the scale. So there's going to be 44 panels ultimately when this is done. And so what we did is to make this, is we had to separate background from foreground. And so you see the background, kind of these elements in here where you have these kind of interesting shapes. And then the foreground are these kind of very fantastical kind of otherworldly figures. So to get the transitions that we wanted, rather than using enamel paints, which is what a lot of firms do, we wanted to actually make the glass out of glass, not treat the surface of glass. So we were taking the frit. You can see this is the frit, the sand. He's spreading the frit on this piece here to create transitions of color. And so it took us quite a while. We call these frit sheets now to make these transitions of color with the frit to move from one color to another. So we can get these beautiful transitions. You can see them here. And these transitions, all these numbers, all these are all weights that we've used of the frit. So we had to figure out when we're using this, how we can make 44 panels and be consistent with more than one person making them. So we figured out all of these things about weighing, the amount of material. We have paper grids that we're working on. And here you can see James kind of checking our first batch of colors. Here's the frit sheet. It's labeled. You see the shapes that are going to be cut out of it with the water jet. And so they'll actually be cut into pieces, assembled together with the clear glass. You can see this clear glass that's going around them. Again, impossible to cut by hand. This all had to be done on a water jet. They get assembled together like this. And then we put them in the kiln. We cap them with another piece of glass because glass in its natural state wants to be 1/4 of an inch, 6 millimeters thick. And so if we make the glass 6 millimeters thick, it's less likely to move. And so by capping it, putting it in the kiln, all of those pieces that we've pre-made, we've cut, and now we can fire it to get it into a single panel. And so we made all the background panels to then be able to introduce the foreground. So these will be cut. These background pieces will be cut. And I'll show you real quickly. So we look at this, we call this a monk mouse. This mouse is sitting on the back of a dragon. So you see kind of the tail here and the legs here going up. And then there's actually 3 heads of this dragon and this mouse that's sitting right here. And I just want to kind of walk you through this. So you see the hands there. The hands, we use the same technique. So in the computer, we're generating all of these printouts and kind of deciphering how the shifts of color are going to work. This is all done in Rhino. So if you're familiar with Rhino, and then we use Grasshopper for scripting to create a piece that'll then get sent to the water jet and cut. And then we use black glass to fill in. So the other amazing thing about this is the technology is that the artist's line work. So James working in Procreate, we export his actual line work. And we can cut this black glass. So that line, it looks like line, that's actually glass that's been cut to outline the hand there. And so we're getting kind of a lot of control. Here's the other hand, again, with the black glass around it. This is before firing. And then here you can see this is a sample that we did. It's been integrated with the background. And so this is still kind of in process. Like I said, we're just starting in on the foreground. We're finished with the background. And the other interesting thing about this is that you see the kind of the highlights. So if you look at this area right here, you see this is creating highlights behind it. This is the textured glass that we're using now. That'll be the outside skin of this process. So this outside skin serves an aesthetic form that James didn't want, just clear architectural glass, because we're going to be laminating the fused glass to architecturally strengthened laminate glass, and then this will be the outside skin. And so not only is it aesthetic, we're able to use James's lines again to create these textures. So we can create molds that then go, we can take float glass, mold it to the shapes that we want, that we've created with these molds, and then that'll serve as the outside skin. And what that does is not only does it create an aesthetic, but it also helps with diffusing the light, because we didn't want to create basically an oven, which this could have been. So these 3 layers will go in. I'll show you here kind of how the frame is working and how this became kind of an engineering project more than anything, is that James didn't want a 3-inch steel, which it probably would have taken. So So we worked with some architects and engineers to design a structure that we could use that laminated glass you saw go in, adhere that to these teeth, basically, that will keep it locked in. The art will go on the inside, this protective layer will go on the outside, and then we'll actually be able to construct it in situ with this structure and without having to use kind of a separate structure. So these panels will all live individually, and they'll piece in together, and we'll clean it up to make it fit all together. And so then now we only have about 1.5 inches in between the panels, as opposed to 3 inches, which is what structural steel would take. And so the edges of the glass basically compressed against each other is what is holding the element in place. So this is kind of a last thing that I want to show you, kind of what it'll look like. We're hoping to finish this in February. The idea right now is that this will be going up to Forest Lawn in Glendale at their museum, and you'll be able to visit it and go inside of it. This is hopefully what it'll look like inside. But we are really trying to push this to kind of see not only material-wise, but structurally, kind of what the glass could do and how it could be performing in a different way. So anyway, I just want to thank you all for letting me speak to you today. I appreciate a lot of the work that you all do. We all work on these structures that are historically significant and mean a lot. And glass is just a small part of that. But I think what's important is that what we do in our lives every day, how these structures are able to be maintained and enjoyed for future years to come. And so I thank you all for hearing me out, and not only our restoration, but our new work. I know you're primarily working in preservation, but I think a lot of the new work we need to know today, what the technologies are in the future, how we're going to have to address these projects that'll be existing in the 100 years that we'll be addressing them. And so lastly, I put this code here, the CPF. If you go to our website, you can buy my book, which Lisa had mentioned earlier, which is available on our website. CPF will give you a 10% discount, and I'll sign these books too. If you want me to sign it, I can sign it. And otherwise, you can get it on Amazon and go from there. So anyway, I'm happy to take any questions or.
Yes, we do have some questions, so I will just dive in. Thank you very much for this presentation, by the way. I loved every minute of it. So just quickly jumping in here, we have probably about 6 minutes left for questions. So first question is from an anonymous attendee, when they try to solder zinc framing with their students, they often encounter a problem where it won't bind to the surface of the framing. They've tried using flux and not using flux, and they just can't figure out what's going wrong. So how would you address that problem?
Yeah, it does require a different kind of flux. So there are fluxes that you can get that can interact. The problem with the fluxes that you find off the shelf often are only suited for lead. And so if you're getting into steel or zinc, you need a different kind of flux to do that. If you're using a liquid flux, which rather than a paste, a lot of people use paste. If you're using a liquid flux, you can take a piece of zinc and let it sit in that liquid flux, and the reaction of the zinc to the flux will allow you to use that then flux to use for. So that's kind of if you can't find the right flux, that's a good way to make your own flux that'll work with the zinc.
That's very interesting. Thank you. Next question is related to your Colorado Springs project. What glue did you use to glue those broken pieces back together?
Yeah, there was this was specified in our spec. So we were actually working with, I believe it was Spectrum. I don't know which one it was, if it was Spectrum 2 or 3. I can't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, we generally use silicone-based materials for projects that are going to be exposed to UV. So a lot of times you can use Hextol, but Hextol sometimes doesn't perform when it's exposed to UV pretty good. And there will be protective layer on outside of these windows when they go back in. But it was a silicon-based, sorry, I don't know exactly which spectrum we were using, but that's what we were using.
Makes sense. Thank you. One other just quick question, I think. Did Judson design the dome at South Coast Plaza in Costa Mesa?
Yes, we did. Actually, we didn't design it, but we made it. It was designed by Marion. I'm forgetting his name right now, but he worked for
Marion
Gruen.
Sampler?
Sampler, sorry. He worked for Gruen Architects, and he designed South Coast Plaza as well as the Industry Hills dome. That's the hotel golf resort out there now. I had that South Coast Plaza image in my talk, and I took it out. 'Cause I had to.
Well, you've got some Gruen folks in the audience, so I think they were just
Okay, yeah.
interested to
So,
see.
Marion Sampler worked for Gruen for a number of years, and he was influenced by the dome that Judson made at Stanford Court in San Francisco, which I think has recently been removed. Unfortunately, they painted over them, and now I think they're removed. And after that, Marion Sampler designed South Coast Plaza and Industry Hills domes. So we worked with them on both of those domes, Judson.
Oh, excellent memory.
That
Oh,
was part of my book research.
there you go. Yeah.
So,
So another question, a little bit of a departure here. This questioner, recently read a fictionalized novel that discusses Clara Driscoll and the Tiffany Girls. And so she's curious to know if Judson had women artisan employees in the late 19th or early 20th centuries, which, was in a time where it was still a challenge to be a working woman.
yes. There were some women, not a lot. It's a little bit different from the Tiffany scenario where it was like almost like a production, right? And Judson was somewhat of a production, but it didn't have as many folks working but I don't know how many or and what time over the years. So but yeah, it's very interesting the work that's coming out of the Tiffany research and the amount of women working there at the studio.
Yeah. Another question about your maybe more current workers, I guess. Are your artisans and employees typically kind of European or Central or South American, or do you trade U.S. Americans, or just kind of a mixture of everyone who wants to work for Judson?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that I talk about in some of my other talks about how when I first started working at Judson, in the mid 90s, it was primarily retirement age, Eastern European, almost retirees, right? They were, but they could draw, and they had this kind of idea of being able to, Judson did primarily traditional work. And so we saw a lot of that. So I felt like that had to change. And so my way of doing that was to open an art gallery and have an art gallery at our original location, bring in young artists, different artwork, kind of become more plugged into the community. And so now, we're almost 30 people, and I would say 80-90% of them are Americans under the age of 40. And so what we're seeing is an interest by younger people to really work with their hands, work in the studio. And so yeah, we've been really lucky. It's an amazing crew that we have right now working for us. Super talented. The artist designers usually are coming out of art center or different art schools. Our tradesmen are varied. They maybe come from a different trade, or they've worked at another studio, and then they come in, and then because we're so many people, there's kind of a level of expectation of work throughout the whole process that kind of just takes time. So that's something that we're working with constantly is how to get a team of 30 people where almost everybody's got their hands on it at some point. How we can create a consistency of quality and expectation through that whole process.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
yeah, we're very lucky to have a young workforce that is super talented.
Yeah, sounds like it. Lisa, I noticed that we're a little bit over time. Do we have time for a question or two more, or should we kind of call it here?
Yeah, go ahead. David, if you have a couple more minutes,
Yeah, of course.
we just have the one more question. I have one more question too,
Okay.
and then we can let all these lovely people go.
Yeah. So we have this one last question I'm going to ask you. I think in reference to your Missouri Capitol Dome project, the the discussion of sweating the leads with solder would add, they're wondering, it feels like would add a lot of weight,
Yeah,
maybe necessitate more rebar rather than support it better. So can you kind of explain that a little bit further?
that was a good question, and we did do the math on that, and I think it's under 200 pounds of solder that would be added over the entire surface area, which we felt was acceptable. And so that was definitely a question that we asked ourselves, and we definitely did have to assess that. And luckily, our spools of solder come in 1 pound spools, so we were able to kind of figure out how many spools we were going to have to use, and so it's fairly, because it's such a thin layer. It really wasn't adding as much weight that we thought would be negative rather than positive. So we decided to go ahead and do that. But that is a good question, because it is something that we asked ourselves and had to address.
Yeah, excellent. Lisa, I think you had one more question.
I did. I was just wondering when you were talking about, especially again with the Missouri Capitol and this 12-foot piece. Is there ever a situation, either because a piece is too large or too delicate to move, that you end up doing the work on site rather than bringing it back to your studio?
Rarely. That can be done, and I know there are some studios that do that. So we don't necessarily feel that's an ideal scenario, but it can happen. Yeah, and so it really depends on the scope of the work and how much you're actually needing to tackle, because it's very difficult to have everything you need in the field, right? And so we try to limit as much work as we can do in the field as possible, just simply because you're obviously operating a little bit differently. And stained glass is such a kind of a quirky, odd thing, like many folks in preservation know that, like, there's very, very small, subtle things that make big differences, right? And so we try to do as much as we can in the studio, but sometimes you have to. Sometimes you just can't move it out, and the moving those out was not fun. It was not easy. And we've completely changed the crane for the next go about how we're going to move the panels up and down. It was just really, the guys were not happy about that, and it is a little tricky. And but the interesting thing about working on a dome is that we had to build forms in the crates. So we're actually, all of the panels are on curved surfaces, and those were built into the crates. So as they were shipped, they take these curvatures, and so it has been a complex situation with working on different surfaces to make sure that they remain intact. And that's because we're using the rebar system. It's been that 3D scan's really been helpful to kind of understand the amount of curvature that we're dealing with. Because we're going with the bars on the bottom now, it's required quite a bit of work and planning. So some advantages that we get that we don't get by doing in the field, working in the field.
I can imagine.
Yeah, but I say that I'm going to do a little bit of work up in the field next month. So it's never say never.
I couldn't imagine you could probably also fill an entire presentation just on the details specific to shipping these panels across the packaging and shipping them across the country and all of the above.
Yeah, those are very hard lessons to learn, but
yeah, not a lot of room for oopses and uh-ohs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's finding the right vendors, the right people, and yeah, having as little as few trucks as possible to move those around. So yeah, absolutely.
Oh, David, thank you so much. This was just a beyond fascinating presentation. I had such a great time listening to you, and I'm looking through the comments in the chat, and our audience clearly did as well. Again, please check out David's book. Let me unblur here so people can actually see this again. Judson, Innovation in Stained Glass. Again, just gorgeous. I know Christmas is like 8 months away, but get it for that person in your life. You never know when you might need that book for the special someone, the last minute party. Again, David generously offered 10% off using the code CPF. And I believe my coworker, John, put the link to David's website in the chat box for you to look at. I'll also be sending that along with the code in the follow-up email to this program. David, again, thank you. Amazing presentation. Molly, thank you for moderating and help pulling this program together. To our audience, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you at a future program. We'll see you all again soon. Thanks again, David.
Thank you.